when TQL goes like, I want you to download this tracking app, you go like, my guy still uses a flip phone, dude.
All right, welcome to the No Name Trucking and Tech podcast. It's going to stick around. Eventually, that's going to be the name of the show, just because we're going to say it so many times. My name's Alex. I got my brother Peter with me, and this is the TMS episode. Okay, TMS, Transportation Management Software. We're going to be, our previous episode was a little bit about trucking, and now we're going to cover on the tech side because this is obviously a problem in the trucking industry. Is that a good intro, Pete?
I just came up with a name. I think we should do maybe like technology, quality, in logistics. Technology, quality, logistics, maybe abbreviate TQL.
Dude, we're not... It's a lawsuit waiting to happen, bro.
Unsubscribe.
There you go. That's Anyway, so obviously, I know a little bit about TMSs. I obviously had a fleet, and so that was certainly one of the areas the fleet struggled in, which is like managing all of these things, generating driver settlements and keeping track of your loads, brokers asking for updates, you making sure you get paid on it. And then, so there's an accounting aspect to it. There's a, management and document aspect to it. So there's a lot. The expectations from a TMS provider is really high. But first, I think we should discuss like what problems, Pete, and obviously this is probably more your department than mine, but like what problems should a TMS solve?
Well, maybe let's be on the same page with what TMS stands for. I think people use it for different things, but like truck management system, truck management software, even though it's, truck, but it's really just kind of like freight and shipment.
Wait, I thought it was transportation management software.
Or transportation management software. Maybe I'm wrong, yeah. Okay. But basically it's like, how do you manage the information of your current loads, past loads, and everything in between? And then on top of that, you want to include like your trucks and trailers, and then your drivers, and then maybe driver settlements. So the easiest way to look at it is, well, what are people currently doing? Well, if we had to guess what most people are using, what are they using?
Spreadsheets.
Spreadsheets is killer software, baby. Why are spreadsheets great?
Easy, quick, no setup, and I don't know, there's a ton of room. You can expand them to whichever way you want, right? So it's just super flexible and basically no time to set up.
If you use a piece of software from a developer or a company, and let's say you want to track some new column that they don't code, then you have to wait for the developer to add that feature. With Spreadsheet, you make a new column. Right. So Spreadsheets can grow with your needs, and you can start out really simple, and then you can kind of make it complex over time. So I think Spreadsheets by default, if you were to ask me, what do I recommend today? I think we're probably on the same page. We would recommend some sort of spreadsheet type software. Excel has a pretty big learning curve, and I think like people just don't understand how powerful Excel is, me included.
Yeah, me too.
And then Airtable is maybe a more user-friendly spreadsheet software, because it's kind of like an appified version of spreadsheets, and that's actually what we both used, ironically enough. Right. So kind of what do you want as like where do all TMSs fall short would be a question to start. Instead of like what do we want, it's like what don't we have? What are the biggest problems with software off the shelf for carriers? And let's probably like put a limit to the amount of trucks, up to 50. Because I'd be like after 50, you have just completely different fleet considerations, and that's a very specific type of business.
Yeah. No, 50 I think is right around where you're considered, a legitimate, like actual normal sized fleet or whatever. 50, I think you have plenty of contracts at that point, stuff like that. So yeah, I think 50 is a good one. So, and that's what we want to focus on, right? This conversation can be for fleets under 50, right? Yeah. Everybody.
If anyone has a fleet that's over 50 that's watching this, please in the comments say what you're using. That would be very really insightful.
That's a good point. So, I mean, I asked a couple of questions to ChatGPT. And we actually wrote down some notes on the episode as well. And certainly, I think as time has progressed, as the workload and the people and has progressed, I think we have the one thing written down is the biggest issue is data entry. I think that's a newer problem, right? So like data entry, isn't there like a ton of data entry jobs where you're just sitting and typing in the loads and whatnot? Like that's not new. It's new that we can now automate that. Whereas before you would just put a minimum wage person on it and just like, hey, type in all of these loads into the system, right? Like that's kind of how the solution happened before.
Can we take a step back? When
Yeah,
a year one of Velocity, the way we kept track of loads is we would have a literal filing cabinet, and each driver would have like a manila envelope in the filing cabinet. And when we would get a rate confirmation PDF, we'd print out that PDF and put it in that driver's folder as an active load. And so if he has multiple partials on there, he'd maybe have like three or four Raycons in each folder inside the actual filing cabinet. And then when he would get a BOL, you would print the BOL, you'd find the Raycon that it's for, then you would scan that back in to send it to the factoring company.
Wow. Like
this
actually
is still,
printing out.
This is still done to this day by carriers.
Wow.
But you know, it's interesting. It's easy to like say, well, that's old school. But if you think about it, there's no cost to managing your own data. You own all your own data. No one can just take it from you. However, the downsides is, well, you have to be physically present at your filing cabinet to get that information. So there's a downside to it. But that's probably step one, like just regular paperwork.
Right.
Step two would be maybe spreadsheets.
Okay.
And then step three would be maybe software that's custom made for this problem.
Right. And so, what are what other issues that actually one of my questions, right, is one of the questions for ChatGPT, and I have a browser plugin turned on, so it kind of searches the web as well. So why is there no clear market dominator for TMSs, right? Because if you're not in the tech news scene, right? If you don't know what Y Combinator is, it's or maybe you should explain, Pete. What the heck is Y Combinator? Or why it's important?
Y Combinator is effectively a venture capital firm for startups that are idea stage, pre-revenue stage, or revenue stage. So they really don't have a focal point on what size of company to be to apply. But essentially, if you have an idea that they believe could achieve $1 billion valuation, even if it's a 1% chance, they invest in those kinds of ideas versus ideas that have a 80% chance of becoming a $10 million company. So it's a place explicitly for big idea companies.
Right. And one of the companies that we know of is Rose Rocket, right? And I've evaluated Rose Rocket as using for my TMS, and there's plenty of companies that are similar to Rose Rocket, and we're not picking on Rose Rocket, but one of that company, right? This was the big idea for them, which is I think their slogan is this like single source of truth, right? Like that is I think is their slogan, and they're from I think they were part of Y Combinator several years ago. So it just goes to show you that like if investors, right, like now some of the companies at Y Combinator is like, oh, we're gonna mine stuff from asteroids, right? Like that's some of the companies now, right? Like there's these are moonshot ideas. And so a company with their moonshot idea being the single source of truth for trucking companies, like you would never think that's a moonshot idea. Never, right? You would think naturally that would get solved.
It's because it's a huge market.
Right.
That's kind of so it's not necessarily like how big is the idea. It's like how big is the value of the idea, the monetary value of the idea. So asteroid mining just has a lot of monetary value potentially, and so does this.
It's interesting that essentially a transportation management software was able to raise funds from a company like Y Combinator on this idea. Given that the market is big and whatnot, that's fine. But like, it's interesting that this is actual, right? This is actually legitimately a big problem in the trucking industry, that the data is absolute disaster and messy across the board. But to come back, why is there no clear market dominator? ChatGPT said, diverse needs. It gave, looks like 10. I don't think we're going to go through all 10, but it says diverse needs, rapid technological advancements, regional preferences, customization and integration, pricing models, customer support and post-sales services, industry dynamics, barriers to switching, niche solutions, continuous evolution. And certainly one of those things I think that's off-putting to a lot of small fleets is number 5, pricing models, right? And I think enterprise software back in the day would be like, oh, here's a $40,000 software solution. We build it out for you. We manage it, all this, so on and so forth. And slowly that's where the essentially subscription as a service came out. Like, hey, instead of you having this big old upfront cost, now you can just sign up for a certain amount, right? Like that's to my understanding. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pete.
Well, okay. So in pricing, specifically for TMSs, I can give an analogy to like actual friends in the industry.
Okay.
including Igor and Velocity, our previous company, still in business. Like he uses a TMS because I was managing the entire Airtable when I was doing it, and there was a bunch of custom code on that. However, custom code requires maintenance, so it wasn't realistic for him to continue doing that. But essentially, if you're a small fleet and you're managing your own paperwork, spreadsheet, etc., and you basically do the smallest amount of data entry possible, and that is like city to city, rate, and who the driver is. And you type that in. It takes maybe 20 seconds. TMS software comes in and says, hey, we're going to require you to fill in every field that is on the Raycon, and it's going to be $400 a month. And so to a small business owner, what they're saying is what takes me 30 seconds per load is now going to take me 10 minutes, and you want $500 a month. So you want to increase my time and my cost.
Right.
Like if you can sell that, you're a master salesperson.
I was going to take a step back actually in pricing, which is like what I've noticed, right? Is, I mean, how many TMSs have we seen that pricing is never listed right on the TMS? Nowhere on the website can you ever find a TMS. And so they brought in this new idea, which is essentially a subscription as a service or software as a service on the subscription model, which is great. But I think one of the reasons, and obviously ChatGPT, this is their suggestion, which we actually wrote down in the notes as well. One of the reasons is that it's not clear-cut pricing, right? And one of the companies that I think has a lot of users is I think Ascend TMS. A lot of people, and I think actually Trucking Office too. A lot of people use those two. Like those seem like the bigger ones for a small fleet, specifically because why? Their pricing is right on the thing, right on the website. You can see. I think Ascend is $99 a month or something. Right, and again, this is not about Ascend. This is just companies that we're seeing out there, trying to solve this legitimate problem in the trucking industry, which is like, load management just from start to finish, right? From first booking it and getting the order, however that order comes in, to finally settling it and getting paid on it, right? Like this is the problem in the industry. So we're not picking on companies, but essentially Ascend TMS seems like the reason they might have so many users, or a substantial amount of users, maybe relative to these other companies, is that pricing is right there listed on the front, like on the page, right? Right. And so that's what I was discussing about the pricing.
I see.
But on top of that, yeah, you're absolutely right. Not only do you want me to pay more for this luxury, I'm also then forced to do way more work, which is, I think, a good next step to discuss which is data entry. When you're doing your own data entry into a spreadsheet, into an Airtable, you can choose what's important for you. Right? It's like, for me, yes, I need a load number. I need how much it's paying, city and state, just so I have a rough idea, because multiple loads come from each city and state, right? So it's like, and then who the driver is and who the dispatcher is, right? Because drivers paid, maybe on percentage off of the load. Dispatchers paid maybe on percentage off that load. So you need to link those things right together, essentially. And I can choose what's important to you. And just like you said, like, you're now eliminating that choice. Right? It's like a TMS will make you enter all of those things. Now, the argument against that, or for entering all those things, is then you'll have like locations, and then you'll have those businesses that maybe you could then call and start to build direct customers and direct contracts. Right?
Yep.
That's kind of why they maybe require you to do that. But it does seem like this data entry problem is slowly starting to get solved, does it not?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, how many OCR tools, OCR optical character recognition? So like how many OCR tools there now? I mean, AI can slowly start to like actually like help out in that case. Like, will this still be a problem? This data entry for trucking companies, like, or will it like? I mean, I know eventually it'll be solved, but it seems like it's going to be solved very soon. That you could just upload your Raycon, it'll be in your TMS.
So optical character recognition, for people who don't know, is it can basically take all the text on a page and convert it into digital text, so that way it's searchable. The issue with OCR right now is context. Okay. So let's say you get a Raycon and the billing address for the broker is right next to the shipper's address for pickup. Right. It has to know which is which. And so context with the characters is the hard problem, not actually recognizing characters is step one, and then knowing which characters belong to what other characters or which fields is another problem. And so load numbers versus pickup numbers, right? Load number you're using for billing, pickup number you're using for the shipper, but they might appear very similar.
Right.
And so little things like that. But if a great TMS were to come in, I personally think that is one of the things that would absolutely be required. Magic, and it has to be in real time. So there's companies that maybe go like, it's processing. We'll let you know when it's ready, which does not work. If you, let's say, get a shipment at 3:30 p.m. and you got to dispatch your driver now, you can't wait an undisclosed amount of time for that to be ready. So then you can dispatch. Again, like every TMS has some kind of bottleneck that the business has to adapt to. And a TMS should adapt to the business instead.
That's a good, a high-level way of putting it.
Yeah, and so a data entry would be like, I take my Raycon, I drag it onto the screen, a little scanning animation, and it goes like, and it maps all the fields, and it's perfect. And then if you need to make edits right there, then and there, maybe it doesn't get it 100% of the way, but it gets it 80% or 90%, and then you tweak. Basically, if the amount of data entry you have to do is less than 10 seconds, that's good data entry.
Right. And I know there's companies working on this, and essentially how sometimes, obviously, the typical distribution curve, right? Most of the brokers have most of the loads and whatnot, right? Or a small percentage of brokers have most of the loads, and then there's a long tail from there. But so one way that I've heard TMSs are trying to solve this is they're obviously offshoring a ton of people. They're training people on how to read Raycons and whatnot. And so then they're just doing that manually with an offshore team, right? So, and that seems like a manual way to kind of get around that. And then that's somewhat included into your subscription price, right? On the software. But essentially that seems like if a fleet is looking at a TMS right now, that should be their consideration, right? Like, can you help me reduce, or can you reduce my data entry time? Right,
because every Raycon is different. This is why it's inherently a difficult problem. I mean, we've gotten Raycons that were hand filled out and then scanned, and so reading like a cursive address is a nightmare. And you're like, what is this? People don't know cursive anymore. People, including people, I mean me. It's hard to read someone's cursive sometimes. It's like doctor's handwriting.
Right.
And so there's a unique challenge with rate confirmations. The other issue is you might be doing a direct customer load, and you have to make the Raycon.
Right.
So then the ability to generate, so there's all these weird edge cases that come up just on the data entry side. And I think data entry is maybe just the big step one. And that is, how does the data of my shipments period get into your digital system? Mm-hmm. Companies, I think, ignore that. And they move to step 2, and they highlight all of the features in step 2 by not addressing the huge what's called blockage that is step 1. It's like, it's great that it's cool at step 2, but if it takes 20 hours of work per week to get it to step 2, that's not worth my time, and it's definitely not worth the cost.
Right. It's awesome that it looks nice. You have great colors. There's this nice, lipstick on a pig scenario, right? It's like, this is all fantastic. It's awesome that I can send location updates. It's awesome that customers can log into their portal and get documents. All of this stuff is great. But like I think you mentioned in episode 2, literally nobody cares. They don't pay you more for it.
Right.
Right.
And the other thing is some of these features that are advertised, I feel like they're advertising to the carrier how they can help the broker. And it's like, what do you it's like, oh, by the way, your location is automatically shared on every shipment when you assign it and the broker's notified. It's like, what if I don't want that? Well, you can't turn it off. Why would you want to turn it off? When you ask them, can I turn it off? They ask why, not yes, you can. It's almost like they're trying to sell you something that is more valuable to brokers than the carriers. Like, carriers are often treated as an afterthought for a lot of this stuff. But let's take a step back. We can get carried away. We have a tendency to do this. So step 1 should really highlight kind of the main points is how information is entered into the system, whether it be ELD pairing, whether it be your fleet card information, and then the loads. Oh, and then driver updates, and then dispatcher information. So you have to have the information of the dispatcher, the driver, the truck, the trailer, and the actual cargo on top of all this, and then make maybe a weird requirements on top of all of this. Does this special, if, for example, let's say someone books a load and then someone else does something with that load. It's like, well, how can you transfer that data over? Does this cargo need a rider? Does this need extra insurance? Does this need hazmat? Does this need permits? And if you just treat every load as standardized, which it never is, I think you run into an issue. There was also a company, I forgot the name, they were on Freight Waves, and I did a demo call with them when we were looking for a TMS. and they raised I think like $2 million in funding.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the call with the founder, and I was like, "This is all great. How can I do a partial?" And he's like, "Oh, well, we don't do partials." And it's like, what do you mean you don't do partials?
I was going to bring it up. There's FTL and LTL, which is like two totally different systems, and it just doesn't make sense. But I was actually going to add, I didn't want to interrupt. The other thing is, like, let's say you pay your drivers per mile, per stop, whatever the case may be, right? Tons of companies have, other pay. What happens if a truck breaks down and drivers swap loads? Like, how do you make sure that the driver gets paid for the pickup and then the other driver gets paid for delivering that load, right? And so it's like all of these things, like it makes sense now why there's, ChatGPT lists out 10 different reasons why there is no clear market dominator. And I think it says right there, the number one is diverse needs, right? So a lot of like, just like there's complete and utter segmentation and chaos in trucking, like 80-90% of fleets are under 10 trucks or whatever. It's like, it seems like it's the same thing with TMSs. All these TMSs have a handful of customers that they try to focus on one specifically, but it seems like the core of the issue is like why aren't you focusing on the carrier needs first? Like, you're actually trying to solve my problems. So it's like, if you're actually trying to solve my problems, why aren't you focused on my needs first? I'm telling you, a lot of carriers do partial loads, right? They take a load that fills up the majority of the trailer.
Who doesn't have an occasional partial? At least once a year.
Right.
Yeah, and that was a great example. If you have a driver, let's say, shipping some kind of shipment from West Coast to East Coast, and they break down halfway, and then another driver happens to be in the area and he picks it up, like, you're paying the driver for that half trip, and then you're paying the other driver for that half trip. And and then maybe the accessory pay is different. Maybe you have a driver who's been with you for a couple of years, he gets different accessory pay than a driver who's been with you first year. And so you want to go like, okay, when I paid this driver, and the load was tarped, and the load had to have chains, and the load had to have permits, and we give extra pay for these things, like, you want this to automatically be calculated. Right. And it's funny, I was talking to Igor about this, runs Velocity, and we were talking about how current TMSs are like cash register systems. So our parents, they ran a small mom and pop bakery, local bakery here in Spokane for about 10 years, and they had a separate credit cards. They had a separate system for credit card and debit cards. They had a separate system for EBT, which is food stamps, and then they had their cash register. And so you have these three independent systems, and what TMSs are like right now is like, well, we have a cash register with a touchscreen. And you're like,
this is where Square came along and be like, hey, we take all of the dang cards, we do your inventory management on top of default, that, and we have this great intuitive system that can take every single payment option, right?
Right. They rethought it fundamentally from the ground up versus what I think a lot of TMSs are currently doing is polishing the cash register system and making it more expensive or premium. But it doesn't address any of the fundamental issues for carriers. And we can get into like step two. Like, let's say you magically solve them.
I was going to actually add because we were talking about money and finances and driver pay and all this accessorial pay, like all this variety that can occur. On top of that, numerous TMSs, a vast majority of them, they do not do driver payroll, and not payroll. They don't do driver settlements.
Right.
They don't do it. They absolutely don't. And then and there can be drivers and owner operators, right? Which is two totally different categories, right? So it's like if you are looking at TMSs, make sure these are some of the questions you're asking. Can you do driver settlements? What do they look like? How can I calculate this is how much my driver gets paid, right? So like actually ask those questions, because it's great that these TMSs integrate with QuickBooks, but I hate QuickBooks. Okay. Well, I don't know. Maybe they're a great company. I don't know. I don't like QuickBooks. I don't ever use them. And so it's like the fact that you integrate with QuickBooks doesn't mean anything to me. I just want you to generate a driver settlement. And if I can generate driver settlements in my Airtable or in my spreadsheets, it's like, why on God's green earth would I pay you for that privilege to not do that? Right. Yeah. Essentially, that's what I wanted to add too about like driver settlements and pay and whatnot.
So real quick about syncing to QuickBooks. Again, they're kind of going about solving the issue the wrong way. It's like, okay, it's cool that you synced all those shipments to QuickBooks and you create invoices for them. Great. But QuickBooks doesn't retain how much I'm paying a driver. QuickBooks has no concept of miles. QuickBooks is accounting software, not driver settlement software. And so by syncing to QuickBooks, you might, on the surface, appear to go like, oh, they sync to QuickBooks and I can write out a check. Well, who's going to generate the numbers to then give out the sum total of that check? You.
Right. And so making the wrong decision in a TMS can like legitimately be harmful. And then on top of that, they had contracts.
Yeah, dude, if your software requires a contract for a small business, it's game over.
Right. Right. So let's continue. What were you going to say about step 2?
Okay, so we can assume that, let's say, like, okay, we wave a magic wand and all of your data is in the system. Why is there no current great product on the market that goes like, okay, once the data is in the system, whether it's entered manually or magically, why are those systems currently bad? What are the issues with the current TMSs?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
First is we've highlighted so far, right? Like ambiguous pricing. I don't really know like what it is before I can try it out. And then like I do think it's expensive. Trucking is a low margin business. It's like, why are you gouging me on price?
No, I want to specify specifically, like, what are the issues inside the product experience itself? So we got over the cost hump. We got over the data entry hump. Once you're in the system, what are the problems with them? Why are they not good? Because I think this is another key aspect. Like, there is no good system, even if you get over all of these initial
I know
problems.
For a fact, one of the things that was frustrating to me was I had, obviously keep trucking, or now Motive. I had Motive for my ELD, and and I know like I had their cameras, but it's like I know there was better cameras, but the reason I went with Motive cameras because I wanted it in one portal, and I know there's fleets out there that have one ELD from one company, one camera from another company, a TMS from a third, and accounting on the fourth, and it was just frustrating because you couldn't actually manage your entire trucking operation.
You know of one company? Was that us? Because that was exactly
No, dude, that's literally all the customers I do demos with.
Right.
So that I think so. The issue is like you couldn't actually manage your entire trucking operation.
Okay.
So you couldn't see, hey, driver in my TMS, I need to be able to look at my logs.
Right.
I don't this is a simple thing. I want to, if my driver calls me and says, Alex, it's red on my phone or on my tablet, it's red, I don't know what it is, I need to be able to log in into my TMS and look at the logs.
How's that currently done? You have to go to another platform.
Go to the log
or
platform.
ask them to send screenshots because maybe it hasn't updated yet.
Yep.
Yeah. The other thing that I would
So to answer your question, I was unable to manage my entire fleet operations
in one dashboard.
In one
People
platform.
love their dashboards.
Well, I mean, like that you asked me what's the step 2, right? I think that's where the conversation was going. So was the answer supposed to be different than that?
I can add to it.
Okay.
So the other thing is, back to spreadsheets. All of these TMSs look like spreadsheets without any of the benefit of a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So I have the UI of a spreadsheet, which is like the reason why spreadsheets are great is because it's very easy to enter data, but they're not great to look at data. Right. And so what do these apps do? They just give you a bunch of rows and columns that are not flexible.
Yep.
And so it's like, what? I don't even have the benefits of the data entry, and I have all the downsides of looking at this kind of crappy user interface. What are we doing here?
Right.
And it's like everything revolves around a map for trucking, and there are 0 map-focused interfaces for TMSs.
Right.
It's not if you show me my driver's location and I have to read it, that gives me 0 context. But if you just show a dot on a map, I don't have to read anything, and I know exactly where he's at.
Right. So like location, for example, like you're in Des Moines, Iowa, right? Not to pick on Des Moines. So let's say drivers in Des Moines, Iowa. So if it says, Joe Blow, Des Moines, Iowa, that means nothing. Literally nothing. No. If you see Joe Blow, yeah.
Worse. Some city in Iowa that you're not familiar with, because Des Moines is easy to visualize where you are, but some cities like, wait, how far away is that from Des Moines? But if you see it some city that's 30 minutes on the map away from Des Moines, you're like, oh, okay, he's near Des Moines. But you can't reason that quick by reading text.
Ooh. Okay.
So visual reasoning is a lot faster than textual reasoning, and very few TMSs rely on visual reasoning to even work.
Okay.
The other thing with like the ELD, right? So there's a company called Anduril. They're a defense contractor. The guy who started it previously started Oculus, the virtual reality headset. And they have a really neat thing for the military that they call sensor fusion, or they call Lattice OS. Okay. And what they basically do is they take regular cameras that military bases have or border patrol uses. Then they take drones. Then they take radio information, and they put that into a centralized database. So they can integrate with products that are not their own, and they put it into one place that's easily accessible, that they can see like, oh, I'm going to click on this area of the map, and it'll bring up all the hardware that's available to survey that map. You would need kind of like a sensor fusion data for carriers. Now, military has higher budgets, and like there's costs associated with this stuff, but that would be kind of a thing where I log into my TMS and I see my active drivers on the map. I see their statuses immediately, who's driving, who's not. So it's very obvious. The system should maybe recognize automatically if something's off. Like, hey, this guy only drove 100 miles yesterday. Is this normal? Like, this unexpected? Or like, maybe he's near. Like, it should kind of know these things. And then I can just click on a driver, and then maybe it'll just highlight immediately the events that I should review for footage. Like, hey, he swerved here, or he stopped really aggressively here, and it'll just like highlight these events. I could just jump on it and I could just review. Like people who manage fleets, they just need to be able to review things quickly.
Right.
I just need to what happened.
Right. Yeah.
If everything's going smoothly, you're not asking what happened. And so kind of what we did at Velocity was, because we had this, custom Airtable solution, then we had a ELD provider, and the ELD provider didn't offer dash cams at the time. And so then we used a different dash cam provider. And so what would happen is, like, where's the driver? You would check his ELD, but the ELD wasn't updated yet. So then you call the driver. So then you go to the dash cam, and then you review these things. And so this is my other criticism, is that back in the olden days, let's say early 2090s, people relied on manual phone updates, and they had like a whiteboard, and they would be like, he called me from this location. Now, you might laugh, but when you walk into the office and you see on the whiteboard last time he called and where, you didn't have to then call the driver again and then validate that was what he did. It was a single step of validation. What with most TMSs, the problem is you have a two-step validation. You look at your TMS screen, and then you have to call the driver to confirm. Why do I have to do this? Like, why am I paying a premium per month to then validate the step, to validate all of this complicated software with a phone call?
Right.
And we can get to another
just
thing.
Eliminate one of those steps. So I'd rather just not have a TMS, and I'll just call the driver.
Yes.
Okay.
That's what most and like a lot of fleets, like path of least resistance. TMSs are currently not the path of least resistance. When they become the path of least resistance, carriers will use them. Maybe that's another way of like abstracting all this information. But another thing that I was talking with a different carrier in the industry is mobile apps. Right, TMSs a lot of times are only fleet focused, so manager perspective. But then, like, what do you do with the mobile app? You're going to text Raycons? Well, text messages doesn't support PDF, so then you have to use another app like Slack to then train your drivers on. And so it's discombobulated. It's all over the place. And
right.
But then the issue is, like, let's say you are using an app, right? And you send them a PDF. Because app designers are going with path of least resistance again here, they're just going to basically assume this idea that, well, anytime we need the information, we can just ask the server to give us the information. And so what ends up happening is, in an area where you have good service, you get the Raycon, and then you're in an area with no service, and you open the app, and the app says, I cannot connect. Well, hold on. You already got the information 30 minutes ago. Why didn't you save it? Right. So I can use it when I don't have service.
Right. They don't think about that.
Little things like that as you go, like, if you're actually going to rely on a ELD service or a TMS service, and they don't kind of really understand the perspective of the driver, the dispatcher, and the fleet. Like, there's three perspectives you have to nail here. Because the other thing is, like, sometimes maybe you don't want your dispatchers to see all the financial information. So they have to have a very specific kind of scope. So then the app has to work in their scope, not the fleet owner's scope, and then the driver's scope, etc. So that's another kind of issue, is the mobile app for the drivers.
Wait, hold on. You were going to say, but they have to manage those three, essentially, responsibilities, right? Like, how the app works or functions for the driver is very different than how the app may work and function for an owner-operator, right? It's totally fine for owner-operators to see what the load is paying, whereas with drivers, it's like, yes, maybe you don't want to show driver the pay for the load, right? So
or maybe you do, because if they're getting percentage versus getting rate per mile. Like, right, and it's like, yeah, there's a lot of these things.
To add, that's perfect. To add, and then trying to figure out if you can change these settings or how you can change these settings is an entire nightmare in and of itself. Okay? Like, I don't know about you guys. Like, if I'm trying to change a setting on my iPhone, I just scroll down and search. The little search bar comes up, and I just type it up. My God, why can we not get searches that are like the search the entire platform? I'm the admin of the platform. Why can I not get a setting to search the entire thing to tell me how to change something? It's like, why is this so difficult? That it seems like such a nightmare scenario. Like
Right.
just to change a simple setting. It's like,
Yeah.
watch a tutorial, contact us, reach out, create a support ticket, and then take a 3-day response time. It's like,
Right.
dude, they're just give me global search so I can figure it out on my own. It's like, and what? And to pay $5, $7, $8, $9, $1,400 for this? This is the luxury you want me to pay for? It's like, dude.
I had an idea where one of the things, the other thing is like a lot of these companies like, oh, just message your driver, but your driver could be driving, and so like you don't want your people to text and drive and look at and like read a message, and so it's like, how come you guys don't support video messages or voice chats
or audio? Yeah.
Yeah, because like
remember, safety first. Don't use your phone. Blah 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 blah, and then send your driver a message. It's
right.
That's
what is one of the most common apps for truck drivers?
A map icon, probably.
No, just people. Starts with the letter V.
I know which one you're talking about. I forgot. What's it called?
You can do it.
Not
now.
Venmo.
You can do it.
I forgot, bro.
Viber.
Viber. Right. Yeah,
Why is Viber
right.
one of the more popular apps for truck drivers?
Because it's just click and talk, right?
That's it. So why do TMSs not do this?
Yeah.
Like, Viber already showed you the interface that drivers want.
If you're a TMS right now and you're listening to this, like here's some nuggets, right? It's like,
by the way, this is all hard to do. Like, we're not drilling people. We're just talking about kind of a wish list, and it's like we're kind of addressing the reason like why isn't one TMS dominating is because nobody has gotten this right. That's why.
I mean, again, so just to go back to maybe look at history and whatnot. I certainly think one of the reasons there is no voice chat interface in some of these newer platforms, even though it's definitely doable, is because some of the like old school incumbents with the tablets mounted on the actual OmniTracks or whatever. I don't think it's even called OmniTracks anymore. But those were all like typing on the keyboard, send it to the driver, right? That like there was no smartphone interface in like an OmniTracks device that's mounted on your dash. That's why, and so all they did is like, oh, MVP, right? Minimum viable product. We just want to send a message and whatever, just like they did on OmniTracks, right? So essentially, they just digitized an old school way instead of rethinking of like what is the problem that our customers face.
Right.
It seems like.
Yeah, I probably, but you know what's funny is like OmniTracks uses a cellular service and it does cache things, ironically enough. So that old school way actually addresses some of these offline problems that modern apps don't.
Wow.
You know, like to add insult to injury in this case is like they got it right from an architecture standpoint, but the interface and whatnot, like we're still living in a TMS world that's like pre-iPhone. It's like you have this power, and you know what's funny is like every driver has a smartphone now. The only drivers I know that don't have smartphones are the ones that say they don't have one because they don't want to be tracked on a tracking app. Those are the only drivers left in America that don't have smartphones. When TQL goes like, "I want you to download this tracking app," you go like, "My guy still uses a flip phone, dude."
Right. And it's like, how many tracking apps do you guys need? My God, a dozen?
And the other thing would be like trekking is really lonely. And I even thought about this for Velocity. It was like maybe what dispatchers should do is like video chat with their drivers. On top of all of this is like just like everyone has a webcam now at this point. People are comfortable with this. It's like, hey, if I need to check in with my drivers, let me do it visually. It has a little bit more of a personal connection between the driver and the dispatcher. It's like, yo, how are you? Everything going good? Versus kind of like this, top-down king and servant relationship where it's like, hey, why are you late? Like you want it personable, you want it to be friendly, and easy to use for both parties.
Bro, that sounds like an AI thing that you could do. Just That's type true. And it generates your image or whatever, or just like a memoji or whatever, like on Apple. It just generates an emoji and it just says like, hey, how you doing, buddy? You know what I mean? Like it sounds like a thing that could probably be done.
And the other thing with voice chats or kind of any audio stream or video stream is grammar. You don't have to worry about grammar when you talk. There are no spelling mistakes when you speak. There's no comma issues. There's no period issues. And so it's just a much faster, streamlined approach to doing this. So I like that's step 2 is like, what does it look like for the driver, the dispatcher, and the fleet owner? And I think they haven't addressed these things. And then maybe we can. And the other thing is like the customer-facing side. You want to be able to go like, so we built our own custom tracking software. I think I mentioned that already. And I thought it was like really neat. It was completely visual. Broker could check in. And, all of this technology comes down to it, and this is what TMSs miss. And they go like, oh, we provide a portal for your customer. Well, if you don't provide automation on top of that portal, guess what's going to happen? A broker's going to call you at 6:30 in the morning asking for an update.
Right.
And so the other thing I was thinking for TMS, what's a weird thing that's in trucking that is not normal outside of trucking? And to me, one of those is you have to share your phone number with the driver. Like you have to give your driver's phone number away. So their personal number, because most people don't, an owner-operator is going to have one phone, right?
Do you know your FedEx driver's phone number? Do you know your postal office phone number? Right? More than likely, the same guy that works at the USPS, right? United States Postal Service. More than likely, it's the same guy delivering your packages every day. Do you have his phone number?
Yeah, personal number.
Yeah. Do you have his personal phone number?
Can you call him and be like, hey, where's my package?
All right.
And then better yet, they go like, well, if you don't give us his phone number, we're not giving you the shipment.
Right.
This is a weird thing in trucking. And so the other thing I was thinking is generate unique digital numbers for every shipment. Where if you book a load with a shipment and the broker goes like, I require a phone number, you give him the phone number that's generated by the TMS. And when he calls that, what it does is connect with the database in the TMS and go like, here's the current location. Here's his ETA. We're still on track. If you still need to speak to the dispatcher or the driver, press 1 for the driver, press 2 for the dispatcher. Or better yet, press 1 for the dispatcher, press 2 for the driver. And so they can still reach them, but without revealing personal information.
Right. And how would that work? You essentially have the driver log into the app with the phone number, and then this way it's automatically done.
No,
right?
you can just connect this behind the scenes. Like the driver does not care about. He's going to get a phone call.
Right. Okay.
But it didn't reveal his personal number. And then you could do the same thing for text messages. If someone texts that number, it would generate a reply and saying like, here's the current location, here's where it's looking at. That'd be pretty neat. And then maybe even top for emails, because this is another annoyance for fleet owners. All this technology comes down to people. And so you inevitably still get an email asking for an update. Right. So if your tracking portal doesn't do these automation points, well, guess nobody uses the tracking portal. So it's kind of useless.
Right.
And maybe, there are situations where maybe your guy's doing a restart. And if he's doing a restart, maybe you don't want the broker asking extra questions. Why is he doing personal time going around town? Like, is he doing something else? Like, well, he's on a restart. He's allowed to have personal time, and he's allowed to move the truck on personal time.
Right.
It's like so. There's situations where you want to almost like freeze the updates. There's just nuance to this stuff that if you don't address, what ends up happening is it cascades down to the owner to deal with this headache.
Right. And so we're saying all this because we just launched our own TMS with all of these features. No, I'm kidding. But no, like this is the conversation. It's funny how, I'm just looking at the time. Looks like about 40 minutes or so.
That's fast.
It went quick. It's funny how like when we're talking about trucking, the conversation is kind of a drag, I mean, I'm sure there's people out there that can talk about, oh, this diesel and this whatever and blah, 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 this turbo, okay, fair enough. But it's like, when we're talking about trucking, it's like, this is certainly, like, not our enthusiastic area of the industry, right? But that's like, this is where the technology part of it is like, we're talking about tech, we're talking about frustrations of people that are like the backbone of the American, like economy, and the conversation is like we're 40 minutes in and went by quick. It's like, so this is something definitely that we're interested in, and that's why it's a trucking and technology podcast, by the way.
Yeah. Can we go to step 3?
Yeah.
So we did step 1, getting the data in. Step 2 is visualizing the data, and then step 3. What is step 3?
I don't know. Paying out, collecting, factoring money,
getting paid, baby.
Right.
And so even if you solve all these 2 steps, and the third step requires manually getting that data back out, and then manually putting it back together to then get it factored, again, it's not enough. And so what would actually have to happen is you mark a shipment delivered with a BOL, or better yet, the driver uploads it, You have a machine learning algorithm that scans to make sure the BOL is filled out properly, and then it's marked delivered automatically, and then it's factored automatically. Why do I then need to do 30 minutes of accounting to like match the invoice with the Raycon, with the BOL, then create a spreadsheet, and then email it to the factoring company, and then do this? And so this is where the Square analogy, Square is the payment processor for small businesses, makes a lot of sense. Because it's not like when you have a Square portal, the customer buys a coffee shop, for example. You go to a coffee shop and you buy a coffee. It's not like at the end of the day, they then have to then take all of the coffee orders, print them all out, staple them, scan them in, and then send it to the bank to then get paid.
Right.
It's done automatically for like what's a common factoring rate? 1 to 3%.
Yeah.
As you have a higher track record with a factoring company, maybe it goes down to 1%. And so if you kind of maybe a turbocharger analogy here, and that is instead of paying for the TMS, that would be like adding more gasoline into your tank to get the car running. I think a TMS could offer the solution as an integrated factoring company for that 1 to 3% range, and that would be like a turbocharger using the exhaust gas as a way to add more energy into the system. And so if you think about it, like the way to pay for a TMS is to factor with a TMS, and that 1 to 3% that you're paying for factoring anyways is covering the cost of running the TMS.
Okay, but listen, the problem is, that there are factoring companies with TMSs, and they're all complete garbage.
They did not address. They're not product people. How could you expect they're a great product? They're banks.
They focused on number 3 only, dude. They completely disregarded number 2 and number 1 completely. Right. Okay, and so this is the problem. And so it's like, and maybe as I know Omnitrax is kind of like a dinosaur and whatnot. And again, this is nothing bad about the companies. It's just like from what we've seen and heard, it's like that's an older system that. But one thing they did well is they integrated very well, right? So it's like it's either the ELD company that you have needs to offer a TMS, so it integrates really well, right? Like good location, good updates, good tracking, and that or it's the factoring company that you're using needs to have a TMS that focuses on your unique individual carrier problems. Or maybe just a factoring company scoops up a TMS and scoops up an ELD company, and they can actually vertically integrate and become the Square of trucking.
Right, and I would say. And then if we were to zoom out and go like, let's assume that you had a magic wand and you got step 1, 2, and 3. Oh. And maybe we can get down to like, would you dominate the market if you had all 3? If you magically had this TMS, by the way, I have a great name for this TMS. Like this is something Alex and I have talked about for years at this point because it was such a pain in the butt when we were doing trucking that it was like a constant conversation. But if you had all 3, would it be successful?
I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, it would depend on what the factoring rate. I mean, if it's legitimately let's
assume 1%.
Factoring at 1%.
Yeah, let's assume 1%.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
You think so?
Guaranteed. First of all, nobody even offers factoring at 1%. That's number 1. Number 2 is dude, if it actually eliminates all of the hassles of putting the load in and then managing all of that, and it gets paid right away, dude, 1% would kill.
It'd probably have to be at the higher end of factoring, but it would be the greatest experience.
Yeah, but again, I mean, it's such a nominal, like, I mean, obviously it's a lot, but still, it's like, even if it was 4%, I think I started out at 3.5 or something, and then I dropped down to 3, and then 2.5, and then 2, but still, like, 3.5, 4%. Well, I mean, with the current rates,
would people pay that premium to have all of that information and ease of use? Yeah. Because you got to account for the time savings, right? As a fleet owner, if you're doing X amount of millions of dollars in revenue and you're saving hundreds of hours, if not thousands of hours of doing all this stuff, like that's probably worth 1%.
Right. No, yeah. I mean, I would, yeah, 4 or 5% would probably be right in there, but it's just going to be tough building all this stuff out.
Yeah, I think even if you were to magically get all this, I still think you would have run into the issue of getting all the carriers to kind of sign up and do this. Mm-hmm. This would be an idea that, and maybe this is why factoring companies don't dominate, is because it's impossible to build all 3 as an MVP. Right. Like you'd probably have to build it out in stages. You'd have to offer like implementations at different things. And so I think for if I were to potentially do this, and I've been asked to do this with carriers, and I just think people just don't understand how much time this is. I would this would be a miserable experience, and I couldn't do it by myself. But you would basically just want to do like one thing for them. And that is like integrate with existing services. And I would say maybe the first thing you can do is just either offer step one and say, hey, email us all your raycons and we're going to enter them magically into your system.
Right. And it would have to be quick, right?
Yeah.
And I know there's TMSs that do that.
Yeah. We just don't know the time. Like what's the turnaround time of getting this thing ready?
Right.
So it's a compelling discussion for sure about TMSs and trucking. But like those are kind of the three big categories.
All right, so if let's just to recap the episode because we're coming up to an hour. So to recap, if you made it all the way through,
God bless
our
you.
advice to you, right? Yeah, thank you first of all. But our advice to you, if you're going to be searching out there, if you're going to be picking a TMS, I strongly encourage people to definitely consider a TMS. The main reason is because it does help with customers, it does help locating stuff. Like it is nice having all that stuff in there, but the problem is, of course, right when you shut down and you stop paying, your data gets deleted after 6 months or whatever. And it's like, well, I have my data in Airtable and it's still there. I had a driver literally 2 days ago call me and say, hey, Alex, can I get all those settlements because they're no longer on your website? I sent them all of 19 settlements right away. So it was like, It is nice. But granted, I'm still paying for Airtable, so I don't know. But the point remains the same. Pete, let's sum this up. A couple of things that a fleet, maybe 4, 5, 10, 11, 12, 17 trucks, couple of things, key things they should look to. And I think to start maybe as like, first of all, analyze every step of the journey or every step that you do, right? It's like, my dispatcher books a load. He does this with the load. I do this. Here's how I pay my driver. I do this, blah, blah. So maybe like the first step is probably like document every step of the way. And then from there, review TMSs, like get on demo calls, talk to them, and make sure the TMS that you're going to be signing up with does all of the things that you wrote down in your list.
Right. Like make sure that like the things that are deal breakers, write down your deal breakers. Maybe would be another way of looking at it. And then like if they don't do this, I'm literally not capable of supporting them. And so the other thing that to me are deal breakers is contract and no free trial. If they don't have a trial and you can't actually like play with it, and they require a contract on top of all this, those are just deal breakers to me. I have to make a 2-year commitment on software that I can't test. Like maybe a contract is okay on software that you can test for a month. Maybe then you go, like, I've tested it for a month. There's no reason why this would actually not be great for 1 to 2 years. I'm okay with that. But if you can't even test it and they require a contract, to me that's a deal breaker.
Right. Okay.
And there's hundreds of offerings at this point probably for TMSs.
Yeah, a lot, for sure.
I think when to give you an idea, when at the end when I was leaving Velocity and Igor was transitioning to a different TMS, I think he did 40 different sales calls to find a TMS, and each one of them had different deal breakers. One didn't integrate with one didn't integrate with fuel cards, and they were 2 years out on that feature. One didn't do partials, one didn't do locations. So we were doing a lot of military shipments. In military shipments, we would require GPS coordinates of the exact place because they just want to show up on Google Maps as an address. And so the ability to store Google coordinates, or I should say coordinates, not Google coordinates, was not a feature most TMSs offer. They go like, what do you mean it's not a Google address? Like, granted, then you can create the coordinate on Google, what's called the Google link, and then copy that. But what the problem was is they didn't convert that into location pins. So it didn't work as an address for them, because they would require you to. They had to convert it to an actual address to work. They never converted that link into they never just referenced the link directly, because they wanted to show the address on their own, side, and they just couldn't do that successfully. And then not to mention maybe you have like layered pins. It's like, this is pin 1 for the gate. This was a common thing for us. And then like the building inside the base is this other pin, and then this other building is over here. And so you'd need like maybe 3 locations on one load that they didn't support. They only supported, because they go like, what do you mean you need multiple addresses for one delivery? Right. So it's like, ask your deal breakers and figure that out. But yeah, and that's about it. That's kind of a disappointing way to end it. But.
Yep. Well, hold on. How is that? No, it's totally reasonable. Write down what you do, figure out which one of those are your deal breakers, and then start taking some calls and whatnot, and then go from there. Right? Like that seems like
well said, Alex. This is why you're the YouTuber.
Okay. Well, on that one, guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next week. Bye.